Hi, my name is Gavin, and welcome to Whyqd. That search bar is the signature icon of the information age. It is pregnant with anticipation. It can take you anywhere. You can ask it any question and something will come back. You can then sift from that something to find what you are looking for. But this isn't a search engine. This is Whyqd. It doesn't know who Justin Bieber is, can't help you with the weather, and it doesn't know anything about sport. So what exactly is it? Well, what it is a data and knowledge query engine, which allows you to create, visualize, and share your own country risk analysis, rankings, and ratings. With a regular search engine, a link takes you somewhere else. A query engine is just getting started. So let's start with regular search. Since this is demos for the Apps for Development World Bank competition, let's consider infant mortality. Brings up a list of all the statistics within the World Bank API related to infant mortality. You can search via the higher topics, tags such as health, aid effectiveness, or you can simply go directly in and look directly at infant mortality. What you'll get here is a set of indicators and segments. The normal data that you'd expect to see, along with these charts, spark lines. Since you haven't actually selected any country benchmarks at the moment, a standard choice of Brazil, China, India, and Brazil is available to you. These form the grey benchmark line and boundary area that you see in every chart. Think of it as a kind of benchmark that you can use to compare that which you know against that which you don't know. They may not be the best of the breed or even the worst. They're simply countries that you may be more familiar with than others. Try and group like with like. If you're going to be researching small island nations, don't use China as a benchmark. If you're going to want to research fast-growing APAC countries, don't use Sweden. However, there isn't anything to stop you, and either you and your benchmarks are there to aid your understanding. So be free. You'll also notice these little select buttons over here next to the indicators that you've seen. If I simply select it, it'll give you a lot more choice and functionality than you have at the moment. You'll note that you can select from these range of choices over here. Weightings we'll come to later, but right now let's look at rank. This is infant mortality. From a regular way of looking at charts, the higher the number, you usually will associate that with a better result, but obviously as far as infant mortality is concerned, it's a negative. So let's update that and see what effect that has on the scores. You'll notice that immediately these numbers start going down where they're bad. And that gives you a better sense of what's going on. A word on these charts. This is a relative view. These are the absolute numbers. But they only mean something in context. And the context here is the benchmark. So these are relative to the benchmark. And our benchmark can be good, bad, or indifferent. But these scores are then better or worse than that. It doesn't mean they're the best, just relative to that which we know. This data can also be segmented. Segmentation is useful if you're trying to group a whole bunch of indicators together and you're wanting to score them appropriately. So let's create some benchmarks as well. I don't actually like Brazil, China, India, and Brazil when comparing here. So let's have a look. Let's select Ethiopia. Let's put in Egypt, and let's put in a couple others to complete out the E's. We search for the countries we want, their names come up, we select them. Then we go back to infant mortality, and you'll note that the benchmark grey zone has changed, and the rating relative to this has changed as well. Again, you're getting a small window on the data, and you can, if you want, go back in time and have a look, and the data itself, the countries, will be presented alphabetically. Now we can create some segmentation. Let's look at living standards, because we want to collect a whole bunch of indicators related to that. So let's create that, and you'll get a little living standard zone underneath, and you can then select living standards and update, and you'll note that the mortality rate indicator is now part of that living standards section. And you can do that looking for more data and basically selecting as you go. What you'll also notice is that this rankings tag has come up, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Since this is the World Bank indicators, and we're looking at the Millennium Development Goals, I can choose any of these, which are actually buttons, and bring up segmentation and indicators related to these goals. So you've got the 8 goals related to the World Bank, to the Millennium Development Goals. Let's choose number 7, which is environmental. You'll note that we get 7 new segments that we can rank, and a whole bunch of data has turned up over here, all segmented. We've also got a benchmark set up of Algeria, Mongolia, Nigeria, and Peru. This is purely as a convenience. You can, of course, delete any of these and replace them. These are just shortcuts for you so that you're able to quickly get a view on the Millennium Development Goals and measure them. See how people are doing, see how different countries are doing. Obviously, what you measure, you can target. Now, at the moment, these results are simply being presented in alphabetical order according to whatever indicator I happen to be looking at. I can actually draw out an individual country. So, having a look at this, let's look at my old homeland, South Africa, and do a search on that, get South Africa, and then pull up what the new result is of just looking at an individual country. What you'll see now is that a quick report has been created, drawn entirely from the segmentation and countries indicators that you have chosen over here. This is specifically related to environmental. What this allows me to do is get a quick view on how South Africa is performing against each of these targets. I've got the absolute numbers, which mean nothing on their own, and I've got them in context. From this, it looks like South Africa is pretty low on the benchmark scale for CO2 emissions, but again, this is presented as a negative, you'll notice over here. So in actual, since this is negative, South Africa is doing rather badly. Energy use looks pretty inefficient, and the forest land, though, is over here. Obviously, this depends on our benchmark. And so on for all the indicators. Where you notice spiky indicators like that, it means that data collection has not been consistent. So it's collected briefly over different periods. Now, these rankings. I've been very, very surreptitious about them. When you click on one of these rankings, what the program has to do is go out and get every single country and reference it against the indicators that you've got in these segments. It'll then go and collect and look and try and figure out exactly what the ranking is for each of these countries, and then present from top to bottom what those countries are. Obviously, this is going to take a great deal of time because we don't have a huge amount of RAM on this particular site. So let's give this a go. Firstly, let's choose something a little bit easier, like child mortality, and have a look now that we've got this, okay, at what the rankings are for our child mortality target. Okay, here we go, and we can see what has happened. What's interesting here from a relative perspective is that for all of these ratings, you'll see that infant mortality or child mortality was significantly worse at the beginning of our forecast period, or our historical period, the 80s through to about the mid-80s, and then radically dropped across the world. So from this perspective, since the benchmark indicator, the median of that will always be set to 1, you can see that even for the best countries, there is a relatively low range. Child mortality is pretty low, and getting it even lower is going to be pretty difficult for the countries at the top of the list. Obviously, if we go to the bottom of the list, things will be far worse. These fast cuts aside, trust me, it's quite slow to get the full rankings up. One benefit, though, is that we have a limited amount of cache, and so once you've actually done your initial query, subsequent queries will be faster with the same data. What we notice at the bottom end here is countries like West Bank and Gaza that we kind of expect, and maybe Greenland that we didn't. Obviously, we can simply click on Greenland and figure out why. And basically because we don't have any data. So without data, they're pretty much going to the bottom. For West Bank and Gaza, we don't have data on immunization, but we certainly have information on the mortality rates. That brings us to something called the score, which is over here. We can AND or OR this data. By default, the data is ORed, which basically means that in a combination like this, where these results are going to be calculated together, what will happen is if there's no data, then it'll simply OR these, and so it'll take what data is available in order to produce a score. If you're absolutely determined that a particular data point must be part of the query, irrespective, then you can simply convert it to AND and update it. But remember that if the data is 0, then its score will be 0 for that particular indicator. Right, so there you have it. That's a very quick overview of Whyqd, what it is and what it can do. It is designed very much as a working tool. Few special effects, no visual tricks, and a simple interface that allows you an open query format. The chart packs a great deal of information into a small space. The red line is simply an indication of the country concerned. The grey upper bar and lower limits of the benchmarks you have selected. The blue line, always at 1, is the reference point. A score above the median simply means better than the benchmark. Not best, not even particularly good if your benchmarks are awful, just better, ditto for worse. Data is a wonderful thing. Presentation should honor it and ensure that what is there is what is shown. It should not be manipulated nor to conform to preconceived notions. This is the main reason that the data itself is abstracted away from the user. What you see is what is. One of the reasons that analysts tend to create absolute and hypothetical benchmarks for risk analysis is that normalizing, manipulating, and evaluating large volumes of data is difficult and time-consuming. A musician reading a score can hear the music as plainly as if an orchestra were performing before them. The enjoyment of reading is in being lost in imaginary worlds. Staring at a large set of data is mind-numbing. Yet that is terribly unfair on the data. Blame the tools, not the numbers. Whyqd is designed to make data fun, to allow rapid comparisons, what-if speculative searching, and serendipitous connections. Data should have flavor, texture, and harmony. By allowing you to play, to find meaning and resolution in big data, I hope that you'll enjoy analysis and produce better risk profiles. Thank you, and please contact me should you have any queries at all.